They don't want to cough all day. You know? So I mean, I don't think that, I don't get a sense that, you know, for a lot of these issues involving public health issues, I would think people in developing countries are quite concerned. Now, there may be issues of accountability, you know, et cetera, but in terms of public opinion, I would imagine if you did a survey in Nigeria and you asked people, would you prefer to have clean water? Would you prefer to have air that you could breathe? Would you prefer to reduce oil spills in the Delta? I would think a lot of them might say yes. Yes?
It's a slightly different comment related to the last example that you gave from the diamond industry. And I'd just like to set some facts straight that the proportion of conflict diamonds to non-conflict diamonds before the Kimberley Process Certificate was maybe 4% or 3% was conflict diamonds.
Yeah, it's small, right?
Small, right? And now it's maybe it's less than 1%.
Yeah, okay, it's progress.
So we see some progress. But in essence, the Kimberley Process Certificate was not established by De Beers to limit supply.
No, I wasn't established by De Beers.
It was established by the World Diamond Council and not to limit supply whatsoever. De Beers produces every single carat it can. I know this as a matter of fact.
But don't you think De Beers has benefited from it?
De Beers has indeed benefited from it.
They
learned from it. They actually went beyond this. They have now introduced the Forever Mark, which is another more, let's say, technologically sophisticated sign of transparency in that the owner of a diamond, of a Forever Mark diamond, can actually look up online from which particular mine it comes, how it went through the supply chain and so on. So De Beers did that. I mean, this costs money. They have already sunk about $210 million into this to develop the technology. It's laser expert numbers. So up to Forever Mark.
Okay,
now, so they did this because there is consumer demand for it. It's not really to limit supply. So there is a business case. Of course, the proportion has gone down for the right reason that you stated, but it's not done to limit supply.
Okay, fair enough. I've heard that from other people.
There are lots of rumors, obviously.
There's actually a scholarly literature which argues that the Kimberley Accord is really a conspiracy by De Beers, but
that's just wrong. And cost also, you know, there are high startup costs, so it actually they didn't have the money to do it. And the market share has gone down from, let's say, 90% from before when the Kimberley Process Certificate was introduced to 45%.
Yeah, no, I know it's facing more competition.
That's quite a step.
Yeah. Well, that's because there's a lot of diamond production outside of it.
It shifts to other mines. I mean,
Canada and Russia.
Another point with limiting supply, if you then read that the company produces fewer diamonds than it did in past years, it's because the mines reach their end of life as mine, and you now need 2 tons of ore for 1 carat and no longer 1 ton. You just can't get it out quicker because it's even deeper.
Fair enough. Thank you. Okay, I accept all that. Yes?
I'm not as hopeful as you are about the positive impact of the private business regulation, because of a couple of reasons. Because you said that these private regulations are voluntary. At the system level, maybe yes, it is voluntary, but at the individual supplier level, from the developing countries, they are no longer voluntary.
I meant voluntary in the legal sense.
Yeah, but there is a lot of institutional pressure on suppliers to be certified in a highly competitive sector like India or China.
Right, I agree.
So the second point is the cost of implementation. The cost of implementation, as the lady mentioned, is so high that only the richer suppliers in developing countries can afford them, and it also cuts out the smaller suppliers, reduces dynamism, heightens the threshold of entrepreneurship of small workers, which used to be in the textile industry. They could just move to become a supplier. Now they cannot anymore. And these richer suppliers in developing countries, once they have achieved the level of certification required for catering to Walmart, for example, they influence public policy in India, for example, to change the policy so that to put additional pressure on the smaller suppliers and create barriers for themselves. You know? So it creates a zone in which extremely rich suppliers from India, because if you know for Walmart, there is a 90-day credit period. It's true that they can control supply. A 90-day credit period means they are running the business without any investment of their own. It is investment of the supplier. So in India, in the textile industry especially, which I have worked on, there is a saying that supplying to Walmart is like riding a tiger. Because you never know when they pay back. So it is very easy. So all they are doing is that transferring the concerns from a Western European supplier into cost of production. So my question to you is, how can we rely on such unscrupulous buyers the responsibility of doing something that is ethically or environmentally?
I mean,
that is my
So the insights you make, I completely agree with. There's a lot of evidence that that's true. This is penalizing small suppliers. It's favoring more developed suppliers. This is true in coffee. It's true in every one of these sectors. Labor as well, right? It's biasing the market in favor of the larger developing country suppliers and driving out mom and pop stores, etc. I mean, you're trying to see a little counter of that with fair trade, but I agree, that's the big dependency. Okay, so is that good news or bad news? Well, I mean, that happened in the West too, okay? I mean, the classic case study in the United States is food safety legislation, the Pure Food and Drug Act, 1906, okay? We established standards for food safe, for production of meat, for meat factories that produce meat. After we have evidence that some guy's working in the meat factory and he slips and he falls in, he becomes part of the meat, and people were upset by this. Okay. That drives out the small meat producers, processing plants. They can't afford. That's true with all environmental regulation. And that's true with labor standards. Like all government regulation discriminates, I would say, on the whole, against small suppliers. They can't meet the labor standards. We have a law restricting child labor. Okay, it's mostly going to be in mom and pop production. They're driven out, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, all I can say is that's the price you pay for raising standards. I mean, if you want to raise standards, then people can meet those standards. Will be driven out, and so. We drive, and now it's true, it's unfortunate, but that's the trade-off which every country which has stringent standard makes, okay? If you talk about capital markets, the U.S. has very strict standards. You want to issue stock, okay? It's very hard to go spend zillions of dollars on lawyers and accountants before you go on the stock market. Does that make it harder to raise capital by smaller firms which don't have those resources? It sure does. That's the price you pay for protecting consumers.
But I think like the response, to take our hands off on the real hardships that not only suppliers, also the workers who lose their employment because of the higher labor standards that is expected. It is easy for us to say, I mean, for us in this, because I'm living in Western Europe, to say that, put our hands off and say, that's the price we have to pay, because there is always a safety net. The worst situation that a Western European person can get to is to get 1,300 euros from the government for doing nothing.
Right.
But in India, for an example, we are talking of lives of individuals. And to give a small example, like in the labor industry, for example, and the textile industry, where the standards have been raised. Salaries were raised from 2,000 rupees to around 5,000 to fit the fair trade label, cost everything. What has happened is, these jobs became attractive for higher sections in the same society. So someone who was graduated with a bachelor's degree started wondering, why don't I become a tagger getting into the stitching industry if I can get paid that much? So the real poor who used to be employed in these small units, they are driven further away. So my question is, we cannot lay our hands off and say that that is a cost we have to pay. Because the costs are real, human
so that's fair.
costs.
I mean, in principle, if you have economic growth, they'll have other opportunities.
So
then I agree.
What the lady said, like till we have an economic growth, there should be a space in between that allows for gradations of these codes depending on the extent to which the country is, whether it is a developing country, an emerging market. individually there has to be some gradations. Do you think that is a possibility?
No, I think that's right. I think that's really hard to do, and I suspect Western firms are pretty insensitive to that.
Yeah.
I agree. That's gonna. I mean, yeah, the evidence you suggest. That's. I mean, you're completely right. There's a lot of studies that should. You're exactly right. These things drive out smaller firms.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is this easier or harder than the other one?
This one is even harder.
I'm still recovering from the first one.
Yeah. This question is about how you can put responsible care for the environment, stuff like that, into brand value, and what it would, what would it be implied. So the assumption is that in Western countries or in developed countries, people start to care more about other things, and in business we focus more on selling and distributing goods rather than producing them. So there's brand value. The value is in the brand.
Yeah, right.
Now what we see worldwide is that a lot of capital is shifting to countries that are not producing, like China and India. And this creates huge imbalances, it creates huge economic problems in the US and part of Europe, and we all suffer from that. So to what extent do you think that investing in intangible assets, like responsible business practices, as part of your brand value, is sustainable in a world where consumer power is shifting? Now they're using the money they accumulate to invest, mostly governments on it, but at some point in time, this will trickle down to the consumers, and they will probably care less about these standards. And they will care less about these standards if things are produced in other countries. They shift up the wealth curve and move production to other countries, start focusing on selling and distributing these.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of faith in consumers. I just don't. I mean, there's a lot of literature on this. I was just recently reading in the Wall Street Journal had a big story, the New York Times, this was probably before I left the U.S. a couple of weeks ago, about green products are fading in impact. Consumers are moving away from them. They don't find them better. They don't find them credible. A lot of the big corporations that have had these green lines of products, detergents and stuff like that, are find them not doing well. You have little niche, you have niche stuff, selling generate, you have little stuff, niche markets, with niche brands, which sort of have some cachet. You have those in Europe, as well. But they're small brands. No, I don't think, basically, first of all, consumers are very confused by all these standards. They have no idea who to believe, right? The standards lack credibility, okay? B, you have enough trouble deciding, what television I should buy, given all these 800 million choices, right? Let alone to factor in the environment, okay? I think these standards matter when you can suggest to the consumer that they're better off. So if I can bring home detergent, a plastic bin of detergent, and carry it in one hand, and it'll get the same cleaning power as bringing home a huge big thing, well then it's in my interest to bring home a smaller thing, okay, or more energy efficient. So some of these things are fad. I mean, you have this fashion now in terms of fashion, green clothing, and stuff. A lot of this sort of faddish stuff. But I think these are market niches. They come and go. Most aren't very large. They aren't very viable. I don't think that. I don't have much faith that consumers are going to drive this process.
So this is about a positive. This is about investing in intangible assets.
Well, intangible assets. Coca-Cola is an intangible asset, but it's not about green.
Yeah, no, it's not about green. Okay, so but now
intangible assets are important. How many of these intangible assets are also green? Unclear.
So now we focus on the other side. We focus not on reputational benefits that derive from environmental or externalities. We focus on reputational penalties.
Cost. That I think matters more.
Affect brand value.
Right.
Now we know from empirical research that these reputational penalties also take account of whether this is an externality or not, and if it's an externality, there is less penalty. But at the same time, brand value is very vulnerable to negative media exposure.
That's right. That's what drives these companies. Right.